This is huge for the Toronto Raptors, as it looks like they have an asset that no one thought would be as valuable as it currently is. Additionally, Dan Tolzman has spoken out and revealed some major opportunities for the Toronto Raptors in this year's NBA draft, especially with some injuries that are going on to top stars. So lots of stuff to sink our teeth into in regards to this year's NBA draft for the Toronto Raptors. And if you want to stay up to date with all of the latest Toronto Raptors draft coverage, make sure to subscribe to Raptors Digest, because we're delivering daily Toronto Raptors news on everything that's going on regarding this team. But let's dive into the first topic of discussion, and this one has me pretty intrigued, pretty excited, as the report reveals a Raptors prized asset. Now, the Raptors obviously made a ton of moves leading up to this year's trade deadline, dealing away OG Anunoby, dealing away Pascal Siakam, making tons of minor moves to reshape and reform this roster and add some flexibility for this team moving forward into the future. But one pick that I think has gotten a little bit overlooked in this whole situation has been the number 31 overall selection, the second round pick from the Detroit Pistons. And this one is because, there's lots of players going a wide range of places during this NBA draft, which we'll dive into in this video, but for another reason, and it's been brought up by a reporter from The Athletic, and spells it out really well. Apparently that there's also a significant expectation league-wide that Toronto could command serious overnight offer for its number 31 overall selection from a team that's looking to jump into the front of the Thursday's line and select its top remaining player. Essentially a team in that range that could offer players and their representation anything resembling a guarantee that they'd be standing pat. So why is this different this year? Why would teams be really interested in acquiring that number 31 overall selection in the NBA draft? Because, again, this is something I overlooked. Everyone's sort of discussing, well, the NBA draft is a lot different this year. The first 30 picks, they are all getting selected on Wednesday night, going there, one whole show, and then the second round is going to be showed, it's going to be aired the day after. And this is kind of game-changing for not really, the casual fans in terms of where players are getting selected, yada, 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 not that side of things, but the front offices, the people that, actually now have an ability to not make decisions on the fly, not make, have their board lined up with all the sort of late round picks offered and things like that. All the teams have an opportunity outside of a 5-minute window to look at the second round and say, hey, our guy is still here, maybe surprisingly, especially in a draft like this where it's extremely unpredictable, and say, hey, let's open up the second round of this year's NBA draft and take the guy that fell into the selection and work overnight to really negotiate. Masai Ujiri sees a guy that has a ton of value that fell to the second round. He could create a bidding war rather than, the sort of 5-minute spell that he'd have, in previous draft years from the first round moving to the second round, right? This is an opportunity for, I'm sure teams are going to be interested in seeing their guys have more opportunity, put more sort of energy into the players that are going to be in the second round, because they have a whole, extra 24 hours to analyze, to dig deep in terms of the players that are available in that second round, rather than that sort of rushed pick selection that usually happens for second round caliber players. So basically, to start off the second round, the Toronto Raptors have the ability to sort of shop that number 1 overall pick in the second round of the draft, and then players or teams see guys that fell to their sort of position. Masai Ujiri can figure that out, can create a bidding war, and then really capitalize on that sort of, I don't want to say desperation, but opportunity for negotiation for teams to come in and try to swoop in their players. So I thought that was a really intriguing sort of direction with that second round pick that we acquired in that OG Anunoby trade, and has me excited about the potential moves Masai Ujiri can make. But there's other opportunities as well revealed for the Toronto Raptors, as basically assistant GM Dan Tolzman has revealed that the approach the Raptors are taking to this year's NBA draft and how it's a little bit different from years previous in terms of what's going on with this Toronto Raptors roster. Essentially, he's come out and discussed how it does seem like most players have a really wide range. Usually by this time, we have a better idea of at least a smaller group of players we'll likely be looking at number 19. For instance, this year, I would say that we have an idea, but at the same time, it could go completely differently if a few players that we didn't expect to go in the front of the 19 end up going, and it pushes down a handful of guys. Not to say we didn't expect, but maybe that we weren't ready to be looking at with that draft selection. So, given the uncertainty, given how people aren't sure about what's going on with this year's NBA draft, right, things are shaken up in a different way. Tolzman went on to say that a lot of times players get passed on because they weren't able to get them in their facilities for whatever reason, and for whatever reason or other, or agents and whatnot try to manipulate it a little bit and try to get their guys passed by a few different teams, Tolzman said. It just kind of snowballs in terms of someone who is expected to go in the top 4 ends up being number 14 instead. This is a Dan Tolzman interview from Aaron Rose, who did this interview for him. But essentially, right, ends up going in the top 4, ends up going 14 instead. Some players could end up falling in this year's NBA draft, given how things are shaken out, with everything that's going on. And, this year, given the unpredictability of the draft, it's sort of expedited. And now with a recent injury that has gone on, there might be a crazy opportunity. The Raptors might be a little bit too far in the draft standings to really be able to take advantage of it, but there's some uncertainty, particularly about one particular prospect that is expected to go in the top 5 range, but essentially Dusty Garza of Spurs Report has said conflicting reports have European doctors considering surgery for Nikola Topic, who, if true, then would definitely affect how far he falls in the NBA draft and where a team might draft him. Now, I've seen him mocked in the NBA draft before the injury, anywhere from 4 to like 13 in the NBA draft lottery, but if he was going to fall later in the draft anyways, Nikola Topic could be a guy that if he falls all the way to 19, could be a major sort of steal for the Toronto Raptors. And I don't have his picture there. There's the image I want to bring up. Let's make that a little bit bigger. But Nikola Topic is a guy just 18 years old. He's from Serbia, so, 3-time MVP from Serbia as well. A little positive there, but plays point guard, is 6'6", and has a really interesting game. He's really sort of a high IQ basketball player in terms of his stats this season. Playing over in Europe, 15 points per game, 6 assists, 3 rebounds over the course of his time. Doesn't have the craziest 3-point percentage, but knocks down a ton of his high rate of his free throws, so that's encouraging about his jump shot potentially moving forward. But it's just sort of a high IQ basketball player that obviously will probably miss this season, dealing with the torn ACL, or miss definitely the first half of the year, depending how quickly he could potentially recover from it. But essentially, if he's a guy that was sort of mid to late lottery, projected early lottery, depending on some of the mocks you end up reading, if he was projected around that range, I wouldn't be shocked. Now, I would be surprised, but I wouldn't be completely shocked if the injury leads him to fall down a few more spots. And the Toronto Raptors, who are looking for a backup point guard as well as depth in the front court during this NBA draft, forget the injury, the short term and stuff, could be a nice value pick at the number 19 overall selection for this Toronto Raptors team. So, again, Nikola Topic, if he's available, if that opportunity arises, that could be huge. But regardless of if it's Topic or not, as Dan Tolzman sort of discussed, the Raptors probably are going to have some serious opportunities with players falling, going in different ranges in this year's NBA draft, just because of how unpredictable most of these players are being scouted at and projected by these ranges. So let me know what you guys think about all this Toronto Raptors news. You guys best take it as far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.